right, the clock says it's 5:30. Just stay here a few seconds after, and we will call to order the Stillwater Planning Commission meeting of December 7th. The process this evening will be to call for items on the agenda. The commission will hear the staff's report first, then open the public hearing and hear from those in favor and or in opposition of the request. When you come to the podium, please clearly state your name and address for the record. After all interested parties have spoken, the public hearing will be closed and we will hear closing remarks and alternatives from staff. So with that, we'll go ahead and start the public hearings. The first public hearing on the agenda is a specific use permit, SUP 21-18, requesting review and approval for a specific use permit to allow a medical marijuana tree at property addressed as 524 West 6th Avenue in the commercial general. Mr. Harkins?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the Commission. Ryan Harkins, Community Development. This is again a specific use permit request for a medical marijuana dispensary. Address is noted as 524 West 6th. And you can see on the area map and on the screen, the subject property is inside the purple hatch pattern. You obviously see it's at the intersection of 6th and Knobloch. This is the aerial view, giving you a better indication of where specifically on the property it would sit. It's an old commercial building. It's been used for a number of things over the years. But that red polygon indicates the part of the building the dispensary would be located in. This is the street view to give you a better idea of how it looks at eye level. The zoning map indicates general commercial zoning. So that's why the specific use request for this use is needed. You can see the subject property on this graphic inside the black hatch pattern, but you'll also note the other zoning districts in vicinity, including T5. The future land use map of the comprehensive plan indicates commercial along the 6th Avenue corridor, and that's better identified here on this close-up with the subject property inside the black hatch pattern. We'd note the area to the north in white is the form-based code area. That's that T5. On the future land use map, that's shown as its own inset. So we just wanted to give you some additional information there to help identify and clarify things. Questions of staff?
Questions from the commissioners? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Harkin. This time, I'd like to ask for anyone in the audience to speak in favor of this item.
I'm Diego Enzensberger with Ghost & Associates, and we're at 113 East 8th Avenue. We're here seeking approval for this specific use permit to operate a medical marijuana dispensary on property at 524 West 6th Avenue, and I can try and answer your questions.
Any questions from the commissioners? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak in favor of this item? Yes, ma'am?
We cannot understand you all.
You can't hear us? Is that better?
That's better.
Is that better? Okay. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak in favor of this item? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak in opposition of this item? If you'd like to come to the podium, state your name and address for the record.
My name is Mabel Caldwell. I live at 4324 West 19th. We have so many dispensaries, and I have people that I hire to work for me that are on medical marijuana, and I don't see why we need another one, and I wish they would explain why another one is needed.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak in opposition of this item? Okay. Seeing none, Staff, would you like to offer the alternatives?
So at the present time, state law allows for medical marijuana facilities like a dispensary, provided that they have a license and they have supplied that license to the city. We do have sufficient parking on the site to accommodate the use. However, the SUP is necessary because under the Land Development Code, medical marijuana is a use that's only allowed with a specific use permit in the commercial general zoning district. Having said that, the alternatives available to you are to accept the findings and recommend City Council approve the proposed SUP as presented. You can accept the findings and recommend Council approve it with conditions, noting what those conditions are. You can find that this specific use request is not appropriate based on impact to surrounding vicinity and recommend denial of the request to Council. But if you feel additional information is needed, you can table the item to a date certain. Questions of staff?
Any other questions from staff, from the commissioners for staff? Thank you. Discussion among the commissioners, or perhaps a motion?
I just have maybe a question. It doesn't seem like that it's our role to control the quantity of dispensaries. We have no purview there, correct?
I believe that is correct, and I'll see if Mr. Harkins will enlighten us.
It is correct. We don't control the number. We basically have to have a process in place so that dispensaries or grow facilities or processors have a place to go in the community. But aside from having that process in place, state statutes don't allow local jurisdictions to have a lot of regulations. So essentially, the SUP request is in place so that, was put in place originally so that adjacent property owners can have some form of notification.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any other discussion amongst the commissioners? Anyone considering a motion? Go ahead.
Without objection, I move that we approve the findings as recommended.
Second the motion.
We have a motion and a second to accept the findings and recommend City Council approve the proposed specific use permit as presented. We shall now vote.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Allred?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Prather?
Yes.
Mr. Holgren?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. Next item on the agenda is preliminary plat, SUB 21-13, requesting review and approval to develop a new residential subdivision named Parkview Estates, Section 10, consisting of 37 lots at property currently addressed as 4698 North Rogers Drive in the residential single-family small lot district. Mr. Harkins.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Commission members, Ryan Harkins again for Community Development. Parkview Estates, Section 10 as proposed, is before you as a preliminary plat tonight. The area in question, or the subject property, is inside the purple hatch pattern on your screen. You can see some existing development that has been built out, and then this is an area where there's other development that has been platted but has not been built out yet, and then areas like this that have not been platted yet or taken through a preliminary plat even, hence this section coming before you tonight. You can see on the aerial a better view. The subject property is inside of the yellow polygon in this case, and you can see where existing streets start to connect to the subject property. This gives you a better idea on the zoning. This is an RSS zoning district, small lot, single-family residential, so a 5,000 square foot minimum lot size is required. That is the same as the adjacent parts of this overall development. And then this is the latest version of the proposed plat that the applicant and their engineer have submitted. This came to us yesterday. When the staff report went out, you'll note that there were 3 issues that were left unresolved. The comments and responses we got back from the applicant yesterday resolved 2 of the issues. The third, the one outstanding issue that still needs to be discussed is the idea of reconstructing an existing sewer line to better serve some of the development rather than doing multiple sewer lines through this area. But this is the latest version that they've supplied to staff, and this again came in yesterday afternoon. You'll note a area of existing right-of-way. This is a separate closing request they've supplied to the city that is going through that review process. But you also notice Greenville being extended through the development to connect to what's existing for that street now, as well as Rogers being extended down to service the proposed lots. You'll also note in the staff report that there is a request for a subdivision exemption for one lot in particular, and that is lot 14, which is in the northern or northwest part of the proposed development. The reason for the subdivision exemption request is that in RSS zoning, there's a 50-foot minimum lot width. Lot 14 does not meet that standard at this time, and they have supplied reasons dealing with drainage and topography as to why they're laying out lots 14, 15, and 16 the way they are, but the exemption request is specifically for 14. The other lots can meet the requirements. Staff brings that up to note that that will need to be a separate vote as part of the approval process tonight, and that will need to be a vote that requires 4 affirmative votes according to the Land Development Code. The future land use map of the comprehensive plan indicates this as being an area of low density residential, and that in the comp plan, when you look at the text, can be up to 20 dwelling units per acre. The subject property here on the close-up of the future land use map is shown in the black hatch pattern, and again, low density residential with some obviously public and then other uses nearby. I do know the applicant's engineer is here tonight and will try and answer questions as best they can. They're dealing with some vocal issues due to a sinus infection, but they want to try and be responsive as they can. Staff will also note, as before we go to the public hearing, an email that was supplied to you that we received this afternoon or sometime today, dealing with drainage issues in the proposed development. And then we know from phone calls today there are some concerns dealing with drainage and access as well as sight lines. So any questions staff can answer before the public hearing is opened.
You mentioned 20 per acre?
Correct. The comprehensive plan talks about low density residential being a dwelling unit density of up to 20 units per acre.
Okay. And
they're proposing 37 lots, so we're well below that threshold.
okay.
I had a question about the map.
Okay.
That in lot, well, I guess it's section 2 of the whole area, which is 10, and it's lot 10, 11, and 12, and 13. There's well, there's some lines there that I don't understand what that refers
Sure.
to.
In lots 11, 12, and 13, there's a hatch pattern on their proposed plat.
Yes.
That is a area that had been previously platted as street right-of-way that they are now looking at vacating, and that's a separate application process that's underway. They've noted it on the plat just as an information item. Just that also to help decision makers understand that's being converted into buildable lot space.
Any other questions for staff?
Yes. In the discussion section, the second paragraph, because of the drainage issues on the northwest edge of the proposed development, the applicant has requested an exception.
Could you speak into the mic?
In the second paragraph of the discussion section, it's noted that because of the drainage issues on the northwest edge of the proposed development, the applicant has requested an exception to the subdivision regulations. Specifically, what are those drainage issues, and are they of any relation to the letter we were handed prior to the meeting starting?
I'm sure they probably do relate, at least indirectly, to that email that we printed and gave you a copy of, questioning the drainage issues or expressing those concerns. They're asking for the subdivision exemption, and if I miss something, I'm going to let the applicant's engineer fill in the other details. But because of the way the topography sits on those lots 14, 15, and 16, they laid out 14 in this way with a more narrow street frontage in order to accommodate buildable space. They feel on lot 16, the house would be shifted more toward the street anyway, and most of that area in the back of that lot would be non-buildable. I would imagine at least part of the corner on lot 14 would be the same thing because of the way the topography lays out. And you can look on the proposed plat, like on the screen when we were showing it to you, you could see those topography lines, the contour lines, I should say, lay out in a way where you can see start a change in grade very rapidly. So those are their reasons, and again, they can speak to that more in case there's other things I'm missing.
Okay, thank you.
I might comment, I found that very confusing as well. What they're asking for is an exception to the 50-foot on the street because 14 and 15 are very low, and there's a stream running right across them, so apparently they can't build on that lot unless they get it away from the stream. So that's why they need that long, narrow. It doesn't refer to the 30-page report we got on drainage. It refers to just that lot, 14.
Right, and that's because the subdivision exemption request they're making is only for lot 14.
Mm-hmm. And if you look at it, it's lower than everything else out there. And if you go up the street a little bit, you can see a stream coming right down through it. Mm-hmm. So there's going to have to be a big culvert across that lot, and I don't think they could build on it unless they had that little section there.
Well, maybe those are questions addressed to the developer.
Yeah. They may have some additional information they can share. I do know that a drainage report was submitted with the plat application. Engineering staff reviewed and approved that drainage report and didn't have any issues.
The report didn't have anything to say about lot 14, though. It was about
I would have to go back and look at that
area.
specifically, but like I said, they have approved that drainage study. They did not see any issues. All right.
Anything else for staff at this time?
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Harkin.
you.
This time, I'd like to ask if anyone in the audience is here to speak in favor of the item. Please come forward, state your name and address for the record.
Josh Powers, Universal Surveying and Mapping. Sorry about my voice. 216 West 6th Avenue, the engineer of record. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer what I can.
Okay. I think we had some questions. Commissioner Holgren, yes, please.
For the drainage, mainly. Did you do the 30-page were you participating in the 30-page hydrology report? You did not. Well, actually, it appeared evident to me that that in order to make 14 a viable lot, it had to have that driveway, because the water's going to run right across the lower end of it. I mean, you're going to have to.
Yeah, so when we laid out the lots the first time, we were able to get a bunch of long lots in there, but the northeastern side was going to have a 15-foot retaining wall to be able to build on it, and then divert the water around everything, and that wasn't feasible for the lots. So what we laid it in the best we could with the narrow lots, so they wouldn't have to get into that creek area to the north. We're not going to touch that area. We're just going to leave it alone.
Okay. So lot 14 includes that. It looks like it's about 50 feet long and 25 wide to get to the street.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we didn't want to disturb that drainage area, so we just left it alone.
Mm-hmm.
All of the drainage will be handled in Section 8, which is further to the south, the pond on the south. All of it will run down the street to that pond. The drainage report was submitted with, when we had to reapply for Section 8, it was all submitted then. Everything flows to there.
Could you elaborate on the pond?
It's just
What's it going to look like?
It's just a dry detention pond.
So it won't hold water permanently, then there's no reason for a fence around it?
Nope.
Okay. So it's going to run down the street into that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, the majority of the street will flow into it, and then the western side will flow into the Boomer Creek area.
And much of this study is based on historical rainfall patterns?
Everything is.
Yeah.
We have to use per the city standards,
Right,
requirements, the 2,
right.
5, 10, 25-year, 100-year storms.
Right. If those still are the correct paradigm to use.
Mm-hmm.
I went out there and looked around a bit. It didn't look like there was a tremendous amount of topography. But I was curious, has anyone inquired with the people living around there now whether there has ever been any drainage issues with the existing houses?
Yes, there's been lots of drainage.
Ma'am, if you don't, we'll give you an opportunity in a little bit.
No, we just took the topo as it was and then diverting the water where we needed to divert it to.
Okay, so you didn't talk to anyone that lives there?
We used the topo for everything we had, so
Okay.
we're
You
taking
mentioned
water
some
for the
flumes. I saw the flumes that go down between the lots that end up down in Boomer Creek.
Right.
I didn't see any erosion issues, but
Right.
I didn't know if anyone that lives there had ever experienced any problems.
Most of it, if there are some drainage issues right now, it's because of erosion. It's just funneled itself to specific areas. We're going to put it down the streets and clean it up and make the slopes better, so it'll clean it up.
Well, just to be clear, it looked to me like it would be accumulating on North Rogers Drive is the street that's going to accumulate a lot of the water.
Mm-hmm.
And they've already contoured it so that most of the water in that will go into that street.
Yeah, and the streets are designed to hold water already because of the way City of Stillwater, our curbs are tall enough, 6 inches, to hold water in them, so that's what they're designed for.
Any other questions for the applicant's representative? Thank you, Mr. Powers.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak in favor of this item? Seeing none, is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak in opposition of this item? Please come forward. State your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening. I'm Rosemary Angel, and I live at 100 East Rogers Drive. This development backs up to my property. And there has been a great deal of water problems since I've moved here. I moved here 15 years ago, and the water runs from what was that field and now, which is what they're working on, runs through our properties on East Rogers Drive. It was so bad that I had 6 to 8 inches of water against my house on some of the storms we've had. So I had to put in 300 feet of French drains to accommodate some of the water. My neighbors next door have, when we have rains, they have a stream running on either side of their house for the water to run to East Rogers Drive. We're not the only ones. I'm here speaking. I haven't talked to them and said I'd speak on their behalf, but in talking with all the neighbors, it has been a continuing problem. We did contact the previous owner of this property about that, and one of the things he did that helped somewhat was he had a digger come out and dig a trench in the easement at the back. That helped a little bit. The thing that is different is that they've changed the topography of this property now, so it is going to be much worse than it was before. And when you consider that about 70% of the property will be impermeable surfaces, where is all that water going to go? Because there's no drainage area, there's no soil left. That field used to have vegetation on it, and that helped the situation. But when you consider that you're putting in 37 or 35 houses, whatever the number is, that's 37 roofs, 37 driveways, 37 sidewalks, roads for those properties. Where does all that water go? That property is surrounded by houses now. Where does the water go from this development? I'm appalled that the city does not have storm drains. And the idea of extending this onto more roads and to more private properties just seems a very strange thing to do and a very harmful thing to do. And I would like to see, I know this property had some preliminary approval many years ago. I think that you as planning members need to look at this situation to actually get out there, see how they have plowed millions of tons of soil into big hills, which when we get our nice spring rains again, those people who are close to that property are going to have all that washing down into their places. And I just think you need to get out there and look at things before you make any decisions or any recommendations, because it's going to affect all of the people out there. I thank you very much. If you have any questions of me, I'd be glad to answer them.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you put your house on this map?
I'm at the end of,
Well, it's pretty small.
It is, that's the problem. I'm at the far end, it's really the beginning of Rogers Drive into the microphone.
What is the street that ends there? It's South Rogers.
Well, if you can see Brookside.
Yes.
Okay, that Brookside, when I'm in my house looking out front, I'm looking straight into Brookside Drive or Court.
So you would back up to, I think, what's shown as Section 8 on that particular.
Let me see.
Man, you wouldn't have a hand lens?
Section 8, you mean in the new stuff? Yes,
Yeah.
I back up to that.
You back up to that one?
Yes.
Okay.
My house is the second house from
Right
the end
there.
here.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions?
Could some, I don't know where that house is on there. Could I look at your map and see where it is?
Yeah, if you have that map,
Yeah,
that this,
you have this map in your,
I don't know, I didn't bring it with me.
okay. She's right here.
Oh, yeah, so you're right at the end of the road there.
Yeah, that's where she is.
it's actually the beginning.
Are you the last house on that side?
No, there's another house, which the address is actually West Rogers Drive. Just one house. Their address is 5,000 something.
So
I'm the first house on East Rogers Drive, so I'm 100 East Rogers Drive. I know, it's weird.
So how long have you been there?
I've been there since 2005.
And already you've had how many events that caused issues?
Probably 6 or 8 serious events, but I'm constantly worried when we start getting some rain. I put on my high boots and my slicker and go out and look to see if I need to panic.
The water coming to your lot would have come across that entire field.
Yes.
Well, now it's going to have 2 roads across it, that field.
It's going to have, pardon?
There'll be 2 roads that cross the field that'll collect water before it gets to you.
Well, roads are impermeable surfaces. So while they are used as drains, they aren't going to soak up anything. And so that water, before it gets to those roads, isn't going to be absorbed, because they can't be absorbed by roads and houses and driveways.
So has anyone from...
Commissioner Holgren,
Sure.
if I may, I know we've got a lot of folks here that would like to speak this evening, and I think we're going to probably see some similar themes.
Yes.
So I think in the interest of allowing everyone to speak, if you don't mind, if we could let someone else speak, and if there are specific questions about your property, perhaps you might be able to come back and answer that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate
that.
you.
All right, and I'll just let everyone know, I should have kind of just given these rules before we started. We would like everyone who would like to speak to have an opportunity to speak this evening, because we do want to hear your concerns. I'll just ask you, try not to repeat what anyone said in front of you. If it's specific to your property, that's fine. We're going to try to limit to 5 minutes or less. I don't want to censure anyone, but I think if we just continue on, that way we'll have time to hear everyone and understand what the situation is and the concerns. So with that, I will ask for the next person who'd like to come up and speak in opposition. And, please state your name and address.
Yes, my name is Rayanne Meyer, and I live at 105 East Marie Drive in Parkview. Would it be possible, sir, to pull up the plat map back up here, so when we're discussing it, it would be easier for everyone to see? Yes, that one. My item of concern on the replat of this map is specifically Lot 5. If you look at the very top here, I don't know if this mouse will move. If I can, this lot right here, where my mouse is, would be Lot 5. I actually live directly behind what Lot 5 is going to be, directly behind it, which would be right here. My actual legal is Lot 3, Section 9. The issue that I have with how this plat is going to lay out is Parkview is an old PUD. We all know it's been there a long time. It has certain setbacks from the road, and everybody, when you look down Parkview, if you walk out someone's front yard or in the front yard and you look down, every single house has the same setback. It looks nice, it's aesthetically nice. When you're trying to pull out of your driveway, you don't have any sight line obstructions because everybody has adhered to this. They've adhered to that on every corner. If it's a corner lot, they adhere to the setbacks of each of the roads there. Lot 5 specifically, if that Lot 5, it is actually, my house faces Marie. Lot 5 is actually going to be turned and going to be facing New Rogers. Now, that lot right there if it is built, will literally, the back fence or house is going to be almost, when I walk out of my house, instead of looking to the right and everybody's houses being like ducks in a row, I'm going to turn, look to the left, and I'm going to be staring at someone's fence that's literally going to be backed up right to my front yard, which is going to basically devalue my property, because who wants that? Second of all, when I'm trying to back out of my driveway, it's going to cause a sight impairment for me to back out, because that is like a major thoroughfare. I don't know if you've ever been out there, but it's like the Autobahn down Marie Street most days going up to Richmond School. And if I'm backing out and there's that house that's sitting there that's turned the opposite direction, it's going to cause me a lot of heartache to be able to see. If every house in Parkview that was there prior to the replat of this map has to adhere to certain setbacks, I question why the new development, although I know covenants or whatever setbacks have changed, why that lot 5 is not going to have to adhere to the same build back lines that the house that's built on a similar corner right across the street's sight lines as well. That way, nobody's impeded for their sight lines. It's a safe environment for all the school children running up and down the roads, which they do, me to back out of my driveway. And to be quite frankly, when I walk out of my house and I turn to the left, I'm not really gonna like seeing somebody's fence that backs literally up and it'll be directly centered to my front yard. I think lot 5, if they're going to build on lot 5, the house either needs to face Marie, where the house and their fence cannot be any closer to Marie Street than what my lot lines are, or something needs to be done to replat lot 5. It is going to become an eyesore for many of us that live in that addition and cause a traffic congestion for myself and many that are traveling there. Not to mention the sidewalk is going to have to be changed and diverted a little closer to the street in order to accommodate lot 5. So I would like for you guys to review that and to really give a lot of consideration when you go out there, if you do go out there and look to how that is going to financially impact the value of my property. And not only that, cause sightline issues and not look aesthetically pleasing to what is already existing in the current addition that we're in. It's going to look absolutely out of place and weird. So that is one of my main concerns. I echo the flood issues. I currently mow, and I know I'm out of time, the property behind my house. I mow the entire easement all the way down Marie Street. I mow the where the current lots are going to be built, which would be lots 5, 4, 3, 2. I've been mowing those for the last 10 years. And the reason I do mow those, and then I mow a strip all the way down around to the links, and I mow from where the old addition road comes in all the way down to the new addition, that is 100%. The reason I keep that mowed is because of flooding. If it is mowed short, the water's able to shed and go that direction. When the lots are a little bit higher, that water literally backs up, and I do understand that the curbs are there to act as waterways, but most of the time when the water is up over the curb, then it no longer is effective. It's actually going to come in our yards. And so I'd like to echo that as well. Thank you for your time. I appreciate your consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to come speak in opposition, please state your name and address for the record.
Hello, my name is Julia Ray. I live at 4719 North Britton Drive. And as a clarification, I am a member of the Homeowners Association for Parkview Estates. Just some concerns. I think the word opposition might not be the best word that I want to use, but we'll echo the drainage concerns for the neighborhood. The flood that we had several years ago was quite significant and bothersome for those homeowners. It's a 47-year-old neighborhood. I'm 45 and I don't work like I did 20 years ago. So we have 47-year-old, some of the infrastructure. And so that's a concern. Originally there was platted in there, we believe, that was Greenbelt platted at one point where some of those houses are put. And unfortunately, we did not have a lot of time today. Most of the homeowners on the board do not live in the area that received the notice. So therefore, Rayanne, I believe, let all of us know about that today. So we didn't have time to research that. But concerns is that building into what was considered when people purchased in that area that was labeled a green belt. I live on a green belt. No one in their right mind would ever build in our green belt because it's like it collects water. It's by one of the ponds. But is that something that's happening there? The other big concern that Rayanne made mention to was the Autobahn that is Britton Drive and Rogers. I have children who walk to school to Richmond. There are many children in our neighborhood. We have asked in the past from the city for speed bumps. We have asked for other issues, and we have, that's basically that's been declined. So yes, I control my speed. I can't control everybody, but people use it as a thoroughfare to get cut from Richmond over to Perkins Road because they don't want to sit at Perkins Road in Richmond. They use it to cut to wherever. So, some questions that we have about that is what kind of stop signage will we put in the area? There's not a stop sign at Britton and Rogers currently. It's a take it as you may kind of there. By increasing that many houses, that's going to increase that traffic by probably 37 times 2. And then the other, just streetlights, and then getting on to Richmond from Rogers, how much will that back up traffic there, which is already a concern at times. And then lastly, and I apologize, I do not have the numbers for this, again, for this short notice, but the Homeowners Association has put money into repairing drainage areas in our common areas, so around the South Pond. And I understand there was some discussion about another drainage pond. There have been drainage issues on the other pond, which sits behind Sunnybrook Christian Church. This really wouldn't affect that because there's a road that crosses before you get to there. But it's a common problem, and the Neighborhood Association has fixed those in the past. And we have spent considerable amount of money. I'm new to the board, so I cannot speak on the amount of money and what items are there. So that I feel like that's information that you all would need to have in order to make a wise decision. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Please come to the podium and state your name and address for the record.
Hi, I'm Janice Cox, and I live at 4506 North Greenville Circle. And I just heard about this last night. I didn't receive any information. I am going to ask that you just take a little more time and research what's happening out there. I'm excited about new houses being built. I'm not opposed to it. But since I moved to Greenville a couple of years ago when we had that historic flooding, well, yeah, I'm still paying off the floor that I am now. I had to replace the entire flooring. Our house flooded. And it was kind of shocking, and I know that I'm pretty sure that it's happened before because previous owners put, all the air conditioning in the ceiling and stuff. So this is kind of I think, an age-old problem for Parkview. And I just really recommend that you guys research it a little bit more. And I encourage you to follow what the Rogers family's intent was for this development. It's one thing that kind of led us to that area, because a lot of time and effort, I know, went into establishing what was expected for this neighborhood. Let's see, something that I've noticed too, I'm on Greenville, so we're going to become a thoroughfare. And at this time, I'm not even sure if Rogers Drive is going to meet the other Rogers Drive. I've heard that it's not, which is crazy to me. That's the main area of getting in and out of Greenville. So the way I found out about this whole construction was about a week after I found out about it, I realized our cable lines were cut. As soon as they came in and started jamming the, I don't even know what they were using, plastic or whatever, into the area, I think most of Greenville's lines were cut, most of Rogers' cable and stuff were cut. And so I would like to have more information myself. I'm going to do more research. I just found out about yesterday, not through a letter or information, but just through our Facebook, Parkview Facebook. So I'll just leave you with that and just encourage you, if you've not read or don't have a copy of what the Rogers family's intent was for that neighborhood, we can get it to you. We can find a way to get it to you. I think that is a very important thing, and I think that will guide your decisions. But I'm going to ask you to try not to make any decisions tonight. Let's research this. This is a very nice neighborhood, well established, but it's also well established there's flooding. It happens in that neighborhood quite a bit. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to come forward to the podium and speak in opposition or let us know what your thoughts are? All right. Seeing none, we'll ask Mr. Harkins to come back and present alternatives for us.
Okay, so with a development like this that is part of a larger development piece, we try and look at how this fits in to the overall pattern that was originally established. The proposed plat does generally meet subdivision and zoning requirements. As we noted in our original presentation, there will be an exemption that will need to be approved for that lot 14. Typically, the Land Development Code requires that subdivisions over 30 lots have 2 points of access. With the construction to the south and the extension of Rogers, that would give, as well as Greenville, that would ultimately give this preliminary plat 2 access points to come in and out of the area. The comprehensive plan recommends low-density residential in this area, as we've noted. It would tie into existing residential that's already developed and has been for some time. Proposed density, we do feel, is in alignment with the RSS zoning district. Staff feels that if the issues regarding drainage are, which the drainage report has been approved by the city engineer and their staff, and then the infrastructure issues can be resolved, that staff has no problem recommending approval of the preliminary plat. We do understand there are a number of considerations and concerns raised, but having said that, with these findings, the alternatives available to you are to accept the findings and approve the proposed preliminary plat as presented. You can approve this plat with conditions, noting what those conditions are and what should be met for approval of the final plat. If you choose that option, we will develop a letter listing those conditions out for the developer and their engineer, and it will be signed, and that will be part of the record that goes with the plat. You can reject the findings and deny the request for the proposed preliminary plat as they presented it. But if you feel there's additional discussion or information that's needed, you can table this item to a date certain. We do note here on the slide that you have to table the request to a certain date, noting that action must be taken within 60 days of the public hearing. So you can, for example, if you wanted to delay to the first Planning Commission meeting in January, you could do that, giving the developer time to address any of these other issues or bring additional information. But you would need to take action within 60 days of this date. Questions of staff?
So, Mr. Harkins, let me ask you a little bit about the 60 days. Given that we're coming up on the holidays, and if it is the commission's desire to do that, does the action need to be taken 60 days from today? So we would table to a date certain and then 60 days from today, or we need to have the table picked back up before 60 days lapses?
You would need to pick it up off the table before the 60 days lapses. And
Thank
if
you.
I say something that's incorrect, I'm going to ask legal counsel to jump in.
That's correct, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
So-
Just wanted to clarify that.
Sure. And to give you an idea of dates, Planning Commission meets obviously the 21st of December, and then we won't meet again until after the first of the year.
So our scheduled dates in January are January 11th and the 25th.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I did have a question about how to proceed. There was a mention of an exemption that had to be considered.
Correct.
Where does, and you gave alternatives. Where would that exemption fall? How would we handle the exemption?
Sure. So staff's recommendation is that, and again, legal counsel can jump in and provide additional guidance if we misstate something. Staff's recommendation is you handle the exemption request as a separate motion and vote. And then approval or denial or conditional approval of the plat as a separate vote. My recommendation to you would be to deal with the subdivision exemption first, and then deal with the overall plat. And for the record, staff, when the engineer submitted their reasoning for the exemption request, staff has no issues with that, and we're comfortable with that exemption.
Thank you, Mr. Harkins.
Thank you.
Discussion, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Harkins, come back. We have one more question.
I believe you said that the city had no issues with the drainage report, something along
Correct.
those lines. Does that mean that, how does that relate to the concerns that were raised? Is it an improvement, potentially, that these people might experience? Is that?
The engineering study noted how, as the engineer of record talked tonight, drainage would go to that retention pond. When engineering staff reviewed the drainage report, they felt it was adequate and sufficient to handle the proposed runoff capacity, and that it could the drainage system that would be put in place could handle that runoff.
Okay.
Apologies for that. Any other questions?
Well, I have a general question. I'm a little bit surprised that the persons in the community weren't more involved in the discussion of this proposal.
I can speak to that process.
Mr. Harkins, please.
Okay, so typically under the Land Development Code, we do a courtesy notice. It is not required for a preliminary plat to notify property owners within 300 feet. It's a practice the city maintains, again, as a courtesy so that people do not feel like blindsided once development happens in their next to their neighborhood. We try and get those notices out as timely as possible. It's just a matter of the way those notices got out close to the meeting date in this case. But again, that's a courtesy notice.
Okay, when the notice goes out, is there any indication in there about what's going to happen and how it will affect drainage?
Sure. Well, those are two separate questions.
Yes.
We typically list a small area map showing where the proposed development is, how many lots they're proposing, who the owner is, and when the meeting date is, and then a legal description. Does it talk about drainage in the public notice? No, it does not. That notice is typically a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that goes out just saying, there's this meeting on this date to deal with this project. You're getting this as a courtesy because you live within 300 feet.
And I guess the developer doesn't feel any obligation to do anything.
There's no requirement in the land development code for the applicant or engineer to meet with the affected or adjacent property owners. And in this case, part of the issue here is you have an area that was developed, a couple of decades ago versus what's happening now after some of the areas sat vacant. It would be different if this were being developed as a planned unit development. Then there would be the requirement to do a neighborhood meeting. As a matter of practice, some engineers and developers will, if there are issues that come up at this point, will try and meet with adjacent property owners to work through some of those potential issues. But that would be something that the applicant's engineer and the neighbors would have to work through on their own.
So no one knew there was a drainage problem, and the engineers are not comparing what the future will look like compared to the past. So they're not,
you have multiple questions, Commissioner, that probably if you want to, we can bring the engineer up if you want to ask specifically, but I can tell you they did do a drainage report based on patterns that were there and then factored in what their proposed development would do and then made their recommendation based on that. That was submitted to the city when they applied for the preliminary plat. Engineering staff for the city reviewed it and approved it. But I'm sure Mr. Powers is willing to come up and answer more specific questions if you've got them about that drainage study.
Mr. Harkins, just as a question of process, do the homeowners that have concerns, do they have another opportunity to voice those, or is this really it for them?
Well, technically, no, this is not it for them. Okay. So the typical process, once a preliminary plat is approved, the engineer would go through what we call the improvement plans. They would develop the full sets of plans for infrastructure. Those would get reviewed by city staff and approved. At that point, they would be able, after that, to submit a final plat that would come before Planning Commission. Typically, it's a consent item. It would, if it's approved, it would go to council as a consent item as well. So while we typically don't do notices for final plats, it would be an agenda item that the public could review and comment on when it comes before you.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Harkins, I got a question, a little more pedestrian. One of the residents mentioned there is no storm drainage system in the streets currently in the subdivision. Is that correct, not correct?
That's not something I
would know
completely about. I can tell you in general, there are probably older areas in the community that don't have probably drainage inlets or adequate storm sewer capacity built in, and that's just something that we would have to go back and build in those existing areas as things were redeveloped or reconstructed.
Okay.
Thank you,
right.
Mr. Harkins.
Thank you.
Discussion amongst the commissioners. Well, I have some thoughts. So it seems to me that the neighbors have some very valid concerns because they've lived there. They've seen how rain events affect their properties. While there are rules and regulations and standards for design, those are set on some standards and perhaps some additional information that might become more available to the engineer if the engineer had the opportunity to meet with the neighbors. So my thought is there may be some validity in tabling this item to a date certain and allowing the engineer to meet with the neighborhood association perhaps and to listen to some of these comments and then come back to us at a date certain. Those are just some of my thoughts.
No, I agree with that, and I think he alluded to that type of conversation between the engineering group and the residents to enable both sides to better understand each other's concerns. one of my concerns with drainage is, I would assume, that when the original subdivision was put in, there was a drainage study. It was approved.
I don't know if that would be a safe assumption given the age of the development. Things have evolved considerably in the city of Stillwater in the 45-ish plus years since that was initially developed.
Okay, my concern was if there was one and it was approved, and we know now that there are issues of drainage in the area. So another one of my concerns is, yes, the hydrology studies are based on historical data, but perhaps, and I don't have data to prove this, but the 19 floods in May of June may become more prevalent. They may not be 100 or 50-year events, but I don't know, 10, 25-year events, and that's a concern. Perhaps there should be some proactive designs considered to ameliorate, to keep from these events from really impacting the neighborhood. So I agree with you. I think there needs to be further discussion.
I think it would be good if this thing were made a little bit more simple to understand too. We're talking about the preliminary plat for section 10, that we're talking about drainage for section 8. The woman who was speaking about her house being affected by drainage, most of the water comes off of 10 and crosses 8 to get to her house. There are 2 roads going to be built in there and huge changes to the drainage. It doesn't seem possible to me to really separate 8 and 10 from consideration. So maybe if tabling it, it would be a good idea to give some specific requests. What's going to happen at the next meeting or the next consideration? What do we expect to be new or done at that point? What new information should be brought?
Well, for my mind, I would like to have the opportunity for the residents that are in these areas that would be affected to be able to have their voices heard, have some discourse with the engineer and with the applicant about those items, and then have them come back at a date certain that we choose and report back on how that occurred, and we can reconsider the item.
And what specifically would be done to make sure that the residents are given an opportunity to do that? Someone's going to be required to set up meetings, some city up?
I'll let Mr. Harkins or...
So if you choose as a commission to defer the item, with the idea that you're deferring to a date certain with the request that you would like, one, the applicant or their engineer to meet with adjacent property owners to address concerns, that's valid. If you feel there's additional information you would like to see relating to, or further explanation of the drainage study, that would be valid. And those are things that have been done historically by the commission in the past, particularly the first item of having the applicant or their engineer meet with adjacent property owners just to help address concerns through conversation. One of the things you would be looking at then when the item came back to the commission would be question number 1, did you as the applicant meet with the adjacent property owners? If not, then that's an issue that is up for discussion at that point as to why and then how you proceed from there. So as an example, and this is a totally hypothetical example, just to help illustrate this, you could move to defer the item to a date certain in January. So for example, you could defer the item to the January 11th, 2022 meeting with the request that the applicant meet with the adjacent property owners to further deal with issues relating to drainage and access and speeds, things like that. When they come back to you at that date, one of the questions obviously then, did you meet? What was resolved? Does that help illustrate and clarify things? Okay. Thank you.
I have one other question. I forgot mentioning this earlier. I believe one of the residents mentioned the traffic issue and that there is no stop sign at one particular intersection, and that this development will obviously generate more traffic density. Who should that concern be addressed to? Would that be a city neighborhood issue?
That would be a discussion between the neighborhood / HOA probably, and either Public Works or Engineering, or both.
Okay.
We can certainly pass that along tomorrow, once business hours are available to do that with engineering staff. But that would be a discussion that would have to be had between typically those groups.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other discussion from the commissioners, or perhaps the motion?
Well, it might not need to add it, but it seems, it's quite alarming to me that a person living nearby had to put in a French drain to take care of the drainage. And it's possible this could even improve the drainage, but the people living nearby need to be made aware of what's going to happen, and I'm not sure that's been done so far.
I'd like to make a motion that additional information or discussion is needed prior to making a decision, and table the request, noting that action must be taken within 60 days of the public hearing.
Okay, and the date certain that you'd like to see this? We have
January
11th. Okay, do I have a second for the motion to table this item to the January 11th meeting?
Does that motion need to include a specific request for the neighborhood and the developers engineering group to meet?
Would you like to amend your motion?
Yes, I would. I would like the developer and the engineering team, whoever's necessary, to meet with the neighbors and to have those discussions and hopefully resolve at least the concerns in some way.
We have a motion. Do I have a second?
I second the motion.
All right. I'm going to try to articulate what I've heard for a motion in a second. We have a motion and a second to table the item to the January 11th Planning Commission meeting. And part of that would be the expectation from the Planning Commission that a meeting will occur between the Homeowners Association, affected property owners, and the engineer and applicant. We shall now vote.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Allred?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Prather?
Yes.
Mr. Holgren?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. Next item on the agenda, under Plans, Policies, Ordinances for discussion only, is to hear a presentation regarding the proposed 6th Avenue corridor study. Mr. Harkins.
For the record, Ryan Harkins, Community Development. I've had the pleasure of serving as the city's project manager over the last few months on this project. This is a corridor study that focuses primarily on alternate transportation along the 6th Avenue corridor. It's a project that is designed to help address a bigger picture type of scenario for the community as it relates to the street reconstruction of 6th Avenue, which is an ODOT project. That project goes from Perkins to Western. And since a project like that with ODOT typically takes a 30, 40, 50, 60 year type of time frame. Once it's built, it stays there that long until you come back and do it again. the idea was, how do we begin to approach this, dealing with a lot of bike ped issues, but also how we deal with connectivity, not only through this corridor, but to areas adjacent to it, as well as potential to provide better mobility and connectivity throughout this study area and the community as a whole. We hired the city hired a consultant that started their work in January. There were members on an advisory committee that helped give advice and guidance throughout the process. And then there's a number of recommendations that are being developed in the study, but this is essentially a kind of a repeat of what we presented at council. The planning team for this project was a team from Confluence, EPS, and HDR. 4 individuals from Confluence, 2 from EPS, and 1 from HDR. So you can see the main people that the city worked with on the consultant team here on this slide. And then this is a rough idea of the process that we went through. As we mentioned, the advisory committee, we also had 2 public workshops, one in February that was attended by 96 people, as well as one toward the end of the process as we started to roll out defined recommendations and ideas. That had around 25, 30 people. We also did online engagement to get additional feedback, and then we did key stakeholder interviews with different groups along the corridor just to get feedback from their perspective. We've talked with you as the Planning Commission, and then we've done a lot of cross-coordination between the engineering design team as well as ODOT. There's also been a project for Husband Street for a bike corridor there, so that information has been passed back and forth between these 2 consultant teams doing that project as well as this one. In addition, we had a team doing a form-based code audit of the form-based code area. That group was getting information that was being developed here, and then their information was being passed on to this planning team as well. So we were trying to make sure, with all of these things overlapping, that everyone saw whatever each other was doing and thinking. So here's an idea of how this structure flows for this next few minutes. We looked at different focus areas and topics and then tried to drill down to different goals and recommendations for each one of these areas. And you'll see 4 focus areas. One, first and foremost, is active transportation. In the beginning of the process, we got a lot of feedback about a lot of different things and a lot of ideas, especially at that first public meeting. But first and foremost, because this is a project that pushes active and tries to promote active transportation and come up with strategies to help with that, that was the first focus area, and everything else began to fill in behind that. So let's talk first and foremost about that. So goal number 1, with regard to active transportation, that became a key issue, is trying to connect the north and south sides of 6th Avenue. 6th Avenue is a right-of-way, kind of acts like a zipper in the community to mesh 2 different sections, if you will. And so those areas that we heard when we talked to people early in the process was it's very difficult to get across. It functions as a great roadway, but it is also a barrier at times. And so we tried to look at key connections going north-south and then trying to develop infrastructure to help support that. One of the things we looked at was, as you see here in recommendation number 2, using a stream called Duck Creek over by Westwood Elementary to get people across 6th Avenue. And then one of the things that we knew from the beginning of the process that was sitting out there was discussions about a rails to trails conversion for the railroad tracks here over by Perkins. And so that's one of those recommendations as well, is trying to pursue that or continue to pursue that conversion. And then that continuous north-south connection at key intersections. We also looked at trying to enhance circulation and connectivity by having more of a complete and active transportation network on key east-west streets, as well as off-street paths around the perimeter of Westwood Elementary to help connect that area to a broader network. And then we tried to look at coordinating more with OSU to help connect this system as it gets built to an internal system on the campus and then beyond to a greater part of the community. One of the other goals with regard to active transportation is trying to connect the OSU campus to downtown. And that was one of the issues from the very beginning that we heard was for years we've wanted this, but we've never done anything about it. And so this tries to address that issue. Not only with an active network that deals with key streets, but also dealing with some of the crossings. So to give you a quick idea, again, we looked, again, that north-south connection across 6th Avenue, but also those key east-west type of things, routes that could run parallel to 6th, with the idea that we want to keep, we know there will be people at times that will be on 6th, whether they're jogging or biking. You won't stop that. But what we can do is try and provide a robust network of opportunities that run parallel to 6th Avenue to give people more of an opportunity in a safer environment to stay off that corridor and still have ability to connect from, say, out by Western and 6th into downtown. And we did that through a different sets of intersection improvements and facility types, and you'll see some examples of that in a moment. One of the things we looked at is what's there now, what could be changed to improve that facility in that key location to help provide better access or connectivity, and how do we connect to what's already there. So here's some of the facility types we will be talking about that we recommend a mix of. One is obvious, the off-street multi-use path, and this is one of the things that people probably think of the most and comes to mind first. Another is an advisory lane where cars and bikes share the roadway, and then there's an area that is striped in a particular way for bikes, and when there's not a bike there, cars can drive in that space as well. Then there's the different types of bike lane facilities, the unprotected, the buffered, the protected, and then the separated, each varying in a degree of safety and mobility, but also changes the roadway overall. So here's an overall picture of what we've proposed or will be proposing for recommendation and approval. You can see the existing 6th Avenue corridor here in orange. You can also see existing traffic signals in red. And so what we're proposing is utilizing the existing system as it exists on University and 9th and trying to expand that system. Wider bike lanes, redoing those streets, and then at key spots doing a potential traffic circle to help slow traffic down and make it safer for bikes and pedestrians to move through those two corridors, as well as parallel routes along 4th, 5th on the north side, and then 7th on the south side. And the idea, for example, with 7th is that it would come from downtown out to the west, potentially out to the Duck Creek area, and make that north-south connection across to the Westwood area.
Pardon me, Mr. Harkins, I think there's a question from the audience.
On that map right there, because I looked at the PowerPoints ahead of time, and I was confused on where it says Hester.
Yes.
On Hester, it's all blackened in across there. What does that mean?
Oh, that
Mr.
is
Harkins, if you could kind of just reiterate the question, since anyone watching
Sure.
at home wouldn't be able to hear
the question was regarding Hester Street. The color pattern appears on to some to be black, but that is actually a purple and green type of line work. That's dealing with a proposed set of improvements to that corridor that deal with treatment to separate bikes and peds from the vehicle traffic.
Okay, that's not a potential underpass, right?
No. The only potential underpass is over near Westwood School. No. The question was, is that a potential underpass? But no. So 7th Street would be receiving treatment to have a bike lane, as well as pedestrian improvements that would extend out toward Kings and then work up Kings over to the Duck Creek area and then cross under using an underpass under 6th to connect to the north side. 4th and 5th would be a connection
Mr.
that...
Harkins, I think we have another question from the audience.
I'm Carolyn Whitener, and I own the Mazios. They're on the corner of 6th and Hester. And I'm very much concerned about how much you are going to take off, because I understood you're not taking it from the south side of 6th Street. You're taking it from the north side.
That would be, okay, so the question deals with how much right-of-way would be taken. That would be the engineering design for the street itself. This does not relate to that specifically.
But when am I going to find out? I've got a leaser that's having a fit.
So I know ODOT did a public hearing. They did it virtually online. We found out about it really the day the public hearing started. I know there was information put out in our social media outlets and a press release about it. And I know one of the OKC television stations picked up the public hearing process for the engineering design. But that was a 30% design. And as a sidebar, they'll be, as they go farther into the design process for engineering on 6th Avenue, the community will have another chance to do a review and give input. So I would expect either probably about 50 or 60% design. We would do another public hearing, and people would have, that are on the corridor like yourself or that own property would have a chance to give additional feedback.
So, Mr. Harkins, what would be the best way for property owners along this corridor to get notice about any of these opportunities to speak?
That's a great question. If you can give me your contact information, I will pass it along to the city engineer's office to help make sure we have our consultant specifically contact you as they go through the design and get closer to that next stage.
I need to know because I've got a lease coming up for renewal, and I don't want to lose these people.
Understandable.
I mean, I've had them since, this is the second Mazio's there. So I've had them for a long time, and I don't want to lose them.
Sure. If you would write down your contact information right in that space, I'll pass it along to the city engineer tomorrow morning when I get in the office.
I have moved back. I have been in North Carolina, and I've moved back, and I live in Chickasha now, so there's no reason why they cannot pick up a phone and call me and leave a message.
I think any notification probably would be like a postcard is what I would envision. But I will talk with the city engineer about the notification process for the next public hearing. Like I said,
He is very jumpy right now. He went through the other one that y'all had that all tore up quite a while. And I wasn't here in the state, but I'm here now. If I have to come up and camp out on there, because that's what I live on. So, I mean, I'm in it to the end. I'm not going to go away.
I will make sure we get your information to the city engineer and the consultant team for the design to make sure you're involved. Like I said, as a side note, I know that previous public hearing was done virtually, and even staff found out about it very late in the process. So we've already expressed our concern about that for the next go around, that we have more notification. So to pick up back up on the idea of bike ped type of routes as proposed here. So we would be using 4th and 5th to connect from Western over around Westwood Elementary, and then going east back toward the Strip on Washington, and then back toward into the form-based code around the campus corner area and things like that. It also gives us a number of routes connecting campus over toward Duck, and then over farther to the east. And then the north-south routes include Husband Street, because that's a project that's already ongoing for the Husband Street bike corridor, but also trying to look at having wide sidewalks on Duck, and if we need to scale them up to be more separated for bike peds, we can do that. but we can keep it a bit more basic as a 10-foot wide sidewalk on each side. Connections on Hester, as well as coming across Monroe and then shifting over to Adams, and then farther south on Adams toward 12th. And then the connection on Kings to go around the Westwood School area and provide connectivity across. So here's an example of some of those detailed intersections. And again, this is a planning level type of document. As we go through some of these specifics, as far as corridors, we'll get more into engineering design at a later date, but this is kind of where we're at right now. So the idea with 6th and Kings is to create along the north side of 6th, where Westwood Elementary is, a 10-foot wide sidewalk path as part of that ODOT project. And then extend the 10-foot side path south to 7th, and then have pedestrian landings at the corners like you see here. That would take out some of that parking along Kings south of 6th and reconfigure some of that overall in the long term. But we feel it provides an opportunity for additional pedestrian safety and connectivity in this area. When you look at Monroe and 6th, we're looking at more separated bike ped type of crossing lanes through this intersection, including a 5-foot separated bike lane, as you see. This also goes to the idea that this may help open up some of that or more of that corner for potential redevelopment in the long term. Then, as an example of the advisory lanes, this is 7th and Husband in the downtown area. This is what we've come up with as we debated different ideas as far as the potentially best option. You could see where the driving lane would be, but also the advisory lane for bicycles. If there's no bicyclist in that advisory lane, a car could drive in that space, and then the car would just shift when there's bikers in that each lane. And this is something you could begin with and then potentially build out upon if you were to build additional off-street parking capacity in or around the downtown as well. So this sign gives you an example of how that advisory lane system works, but also this cross-section will give you an idea of how that can work on a street. So you could have a 14-foot sidewalk, angled parking, and then the advisory lane, a 2-lane roadway area that includes each of those advisory lanes, and then angled parking on the other side, plus another 10-foot sidewalk. That gives you a 90-foot right-of-way to work with, and these are things that, again, can be adjusted as we go in more detailed engineering design for specific streets. This gives you another cross-section. This would be like Husband and Main and 7th, just to give you an idea of how this works and how you can adjust the lane widths. So based on how we...
Mr. Harkins, I have just a quick question.
Okay.
Could you go back and show those sections? And this just made me think, because you were showing the area of Husband, or area of 7th there, just to the east of Husband. I know we do have some locations, commercial businesses in these areas, particularly restaurants, that take food deliveries in the streets. Would that continue to work the same way with this? Would this in any way impede that practice that we have now? Because we don't have alleys really for people to service their businesses.
Right. It's a great question. This doesn't necessarily have to impede that. And again, we can start to make adjustments to this, A, as you build off-street parking capacity, saying, or parking structures, or B, as you want to change some of this parking to be more dedicated, for example, loading, unloading, for delivery for, say, a restaurant.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And that specific question is something we heard even when we talked with council a couple weeks ago in study session. So to give you an idea of how this potentially could help spur other redevelopment opportunities, or I would say fit in with existing redevelopment options or opportunities in the community now. We identified 3 in the study. One is Campus Corner, and we made a tie to the proposed hotel convention site that is in design right now. One is the Strip, and then one is Monroe and 6th. And we looked at that one because of the way between the engineering design and the potential bike ped improvements could help provide additional redevelopment impetus. So here's what we looked at as far as a goal: trying to create additional student-oriented entertainment and amenities adjacent to campus when it comes to the campus corner area. We wanted to help revitalize existing property, introduce new options, really, if you will, entertainment, shopping, things like that, and then do this in a way that can help prioritize efforts to recruit businesses that complement what's there now, whether it be the strip or the campus corner or other areas near campus. We don't necessarily want to take away anything, but we want to add to what's already there.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
You never did answer me. Is it true that you're going to take the land from the north of 6th Street?
Okay. I don't know how the right-of-way lays out right now.
I can't hear you.
I can't answer your question. I don't know the specific way. The question was brought up again. Is the city taking right-of-way on the north or the south side of the 6 where Mazzio's is? That is something planning staff right now does not know the answer to directly. We can I can get the answer for you if that's okay. That's the other reason I asked for your contact information, to get a better idea of what right-of-way is being.
Called ODOT, is that it? ODOT?
It's sponsored by ODOT. Okay. I can help get the answer. I just don't know it right now.
Will you know it in the morning before I leave?
What time do you leave in the morning?
You tell me.
I will try and have it by 10 a.m.
Ma'am, I apologize. I'm the legal counsel, and we're getting pretty far off the agenda. And so, okay, we're getting off the agenda topic. We have to stick with the agenda topic because of the Open Meeting Act. But Mr. Harkins is true to his word, and someone will get back with you.
Okay, because I have had to drive in from Chickasha.
We'll make sure that someone gets a hold of you.
You won't have to drive for this answer. We'll get it for you. Okay. So one of the other goals is to try and improve and expand housing options, particularly student housing. But we feel like this could also be housing in general in this area. So looking at contemporary housing that's attractive to students, promoting housing diversity with regard to types, sizes, and rates, and then having more minimum type of parking requirements that and/or structured parking to minimize the large amount of surface lots that can pop up in an area like this. We also looked at trying to making an extension of University to be more ped friendly or pedestrian friendly and incorporating more green space into mixed use developments. We also looked at trying to redesign University and non-block for ped safety, and then potentially help provide more ability to capitalize on the fire station that's on campus being reused. We know at some point that may convert to something else. So here's what we looked at overall, and I know some of you have seen some of these ideas. So the idea here is to extend University over to Duck and make it more of a pedestrian type of corridor that could be accessed by emergency vehicles, and to close off at least part of West, again, that could be used in accessed in the same way. This could also be a raised road table, and I'll explain that in a minute. But the idea here is that where University makes the curve onto non-block, that's very wide, and so we would decrease that width a little bit to make it easier to cross. We were trying to provide additional redevelopment opportunity, and what we basically proposed, and again, each of these can be done in pieces as a part of a block or a whole. We envision typically starting with a whole area here, but this could be done in pieces. Trying to provide additional mixed use, maximum 4 stories, probably 2 to 3, depending on the market, as well as down here. With parking that's off-street or in structured parking. and then looking at more of a high-density type of residential development over here. Again, this is Duck. This would be Maple. This would be Third. This would be University right through here. So at Third and Duck, excuse me, trying to do more of a parking structure with maybe some rooftop amenity for this residential development here. Right here is where the YMCA currently sits. If they stay, this would be an opportunity for them to have some expansion space built in. If they were to leave to a different location, this would be an area that could be used for something else, other type of mixed-use commercial. We did build in some potential retail space that I'll explain a little bit more detail in a minute. But then the idea was trying to help create more of public gathering space, because that's one of the things we heard early on. And so as far as something that was needed and help with programming for events. So the idea that we developed here was similar to what you see, say, in the rail yard in Lincoln, Nebraska, an open space, public gathering area that can be used for multiple things at multiple times. And this gives you a bit of an aerial perspective, showing the convention center site looking to the northeast. So University would be here being extended. Here's Third, Knobloch, and then University. So these potential connections would connect to bike ped systems being proposed in and through these areas, or these blocks, I should say. And again, this could complement the hotel and convention center development fairly well. So you can see those mixed-use buildings here, that high-density residential, and then potential YMCA or other redevelopment, and then retail here. This gives you a perspective looking to the southeast. And then this puts you at street level at University and Knobloch, looking to where that extended ped corridor for University would extend out toward Duck. This gives you more of a street level type of view to see how some of the enhancements could work together to create more of a urban design fabric that is able to help draw and hold people in this area. And this is some of that open space that was shown on some of these perspectives. This is an example of a large screen like you see at the McKnight Center in an open lawn area that can be used not only for these residents, but also the public as a whole. The consultant threw in the idea of the road table where this could be an elevated roadway if you keep West Street open for services or emergencies, with the idea that you could have movable bollards to help shape the space as needed for different events. This gives you another idea on the perspective for the road table, just to see how event space could be developed and built in this area. The consultant also had on their team an economic development type of sub-consultant who did a bit of a pro forma just to help show how this could be built out over time, how it could cost flow, and then what it would take to make some of that happen. And that part I'm going to move through a little quicker. The next redevelopment area is Monroe Gateway, and this is trying to help open or improve more of a front door. One of the things we heard, for example, from the OSU Foundation was we consider Monroe one of the front door to campus as people are coming off 6th. And so how do we introduce things or do things that help using this bike ped system, this alternate transportation system, to help create more opportunity? And this is what was preferred. And when I say preferred, when we did the second public meeting for each of these redevelopment areas, there were 3 concepts that were proposed, and the people there had an opportunity to vote on what they preferred. And this is in this case, this was the preferred concept. So looking at, this is the existing gas station, and then potentially doing a 1, maybe 2-story mixed-use development building here, potential retail on the south side, and then looking at the area where Washington is here and starting to redevelop some of this block with a parking structure and potential mixed use with a maximum, I would say what we propose here, of 4 stories. And then reconfiguring 6th Place and providing additional landscaping and urban design features to help with the buffering along the 6th Avenue corridor itself. But you can see here along Monroe some of the plaza feature, some of the bike ped type of system in this overall graphic and how that fits into a larger pattern. This gives you a bit more of a perspective. So this would be looking, as you can see, toward essentially along 6th Avenue looking east, and then going from across Monroe, how those enhanced crosswalks and things fit in, and then how these potential redevelopment buildings could fit in on each of these blocks. This gives you a different perspective. This is looking, of course, 6th Place, 6th Avenue in Washington to the northwest. And then at street level, this gives you an idea of how some of that public art, public gateway type redevelopment could fit into the overall fabric of the corridor. And then with Washington Street, we looked at how to maximize bike ped use while balancing the need for parking and vehicle circulation. And even at the study session with council, one of the things we heard was you need to think about loading and unloading. So it's definitely a theme that we'll need to look at, especially as we go from planning level concepts into engineering design. But one of the things we looked at was converting Washington Street to a one-way, converting one side of the parking options to parallel. And that the parallel could be an example of how parking stalls could be converted into loading and unloading. Looking at redesigning 4th and Washington, and then having a more cohesive streetscape. And one of the things we heard at council when we looked at this and this study session item was, don't do trees, from one property owner anyway, don't do trees on the strip. They'll die, they get beer, then pop and everything else dumped on them, they get ripped out. Just do hardscaping and ornamental type things that look like trees. So that's some of the feedback we got even recently. And again, trying to improve that overall experience and image of the strip. So here's what we looked at. North would be to the left of the screen. The consultant team came up with the idea, as you saw earlier, reconfiguring 6th Place, but also redesigning parking along Washington Street, say from 6th Place up to University. So from 4th to south, going south, angled parking on the left side, parallel parking on the right. And then when you go from 4th up to University, that switches. We looked at this, and in this concept, we actually were able to add 5 to 7 parking spaces on top of what you see on the strip now. So the potential is there. And again, that would change depending on what you came up with when we got to a final engineering design, but that would be a later project that we would do. With the idea you see at 4th and Washington, some of that reconfiguration happening to help improve bike ped flow. And so I want to get to these perspectives to help illustrate that. So this is what you see now if you're looking, say, from a drone up Washington Street toward the library. This is what the consultant team has proposed. Pedestrian Plaza at 4th and Washington with essentially bollards and other improvements to that to help A, guide vehicular traffic, and B, provide more bike and ped space at that intersection to help minimize the amount of space to cross the intersection itself. You can see the angled parking on one side and how it flips to the other side as you go north from 6th Place up to University and go across 4th. And again, this is an existing looking north, and then another proposed view of how that could be done with the landscaping and streetscaping elements. And another one that goes from existing to proposed, and this gives you a better idea on a detailed level how that, again, that road table would work. So this would be elevated from the original street surface that you see on 4th. So for example, if you're going east on 4th through this intersection, you will go up onto the top of the road table, come through the intersection, then come down and continue on 4th to the east. Same as you're going north on Washington through that intersection. You'll go up, across, and then down. And this gives you an example of what a cross-section for Washington Street would look like. And again, these are things that can be adjusted at the point you're doing engineering design, but this is more of a planning level schematic for how that can work. And again, another example, this is looking north of 4th, just to give you an idea of a one-way landscaping, street area, landscaping area, and then sidewalk. One of the other areas we looked at was land use, and we didn't spend a lot of time on this simply because of a lot of what we saw was already in place or having the potential to stay in place and or redevelop already and had specific directions. But there were some key areas we wanted to look at. We wanted to focus on higher density development and redevelopment around campus. We wanted to preserve the Westwood neighborhood. That was one of the things we heard early on was we want to leave that as single family residential. We also wanted to protect existing single family neighborhoods as much as we could. So what we looked at was a potential land use type of map or update to the future land use map that would indicate, we know, for example, the area, a lot of the area around the medical center is already transitioning to office and medical. Let's just be consistent with that, what's happening on the ground, and call it that. A lot of the area in this core study area, which as you can see on this graphic, extends from from Western over to Perkins and then University down to 9th, as evidenced by the hatch pattern. A lot of this area was already set. We didn't think it necessarily needed to change on land use. It was going to happen in some cases in areas already according to the market. But we wanted to focus on a key couple of areas in particular is redevelopment and transition blocks. And these were areas around Westwood. And we looked at this as kind of a buffer type of scenario and how to help protect Westwood, knowing that there will be continued pressure along 6th Avenue specifically over time with redevelopment. So what we looked at, for example, at 6th and Western as a transition block was the idea that we go from a curb cut on every single property to having access that would come off of, say, Ridge. So parking would be in the rear. Those buildings would be able to have street frontage, but you would not be coming in off of 6th onto that property. Everything would be rear loaded. So this is an example of a redevelopment that takes older single family properties and looks to be more of a townhome type of transition. This is something that could be office as well over time if the market dictated that way. But this is an example of how, in terms of general redevelopment, what we would like to see more in the long term. A, it helps minimize the curb cuts, and B, it gets traffic coming in one area in and off of 6th, but then still allows parking to the rear of those buildings. The other area we looked at was urban design, and this is where we got into some of the bones and the details of the project. We wanted to help, one of the goals we looked at was an overall cohesive streetscape environment in the study area. Another is trying to help implement open, green, and public realm spaces, and you saw that in some of those redevelopment concepts, but trying to help continue to connect people to places. Obviously, Block 34, with that potential redevelopment, we want to make sure people have a way to get to it, not just stopping at Duck and then trying to figure out, now where do I go? I see downtown there, but how do I get to it? And then trying to incorporate different best management practices, either through sustainable design or stormwater, things like that. So at the second public meeting, what the consulting team proposed was 3 different urban design boards, and they each had a different theme. One was, and I think the chair was at that meeting, one was cowboy oriented. One was very institutional, foundational, had a lot of neutral, very much standard type of urban design type of elements, and then this one that was in what they called indigenous, native, and you can see some of the words they used to help describe this, more tailored to nature. And this was the actual preferred urban design concept that people at that meeting looked at. So this gives you an idea. Again, indigenous, you think earth, fire, water, sky. And this is just an example of how those types of elements can fit into the urban design type of pieces. The consultant's idea is that this would be a toolkit of parts. We would mix and match on different streetscapes or different areas of the community, depending on the size and scale. So in terms of streetscape section, they didn't focus a lot on 6th itself as a corridor because of the amount of roadway and the amount of traffic. And so when they did propose things, they looked at mainly those key intersections as a way to help enhance the bike ped type of crossing. But this is a cross-section of streetscape that potentially could be built out or something similar using some of these urban design elements. And they essentially started to look at different streetscape topologies and kind of a priority as a way to help guide overall how many different elements should potentially go into some of these street corridors as we do each of these projects. And this is an example at that Monroe Gateway, again, how an urban plaza could have a sign, but also smaller scale landscape or streetscape type elements, banner poles with lights, and how that could fit into other features happening in an intersection. And again, this is planning level schematic, so with each of these areas we would go through engineering design. Then of course implementation. They looked at the active transportation network and proposed 5 phases. That first phase looked more at how it relieves pressure from 6th during that construction, how it builds the core framework for the overall network, and how it potentially makes immediate connections and immediate impact on the study area. This would also include potentially that underpass at Duck Creek, although what we're proposing is, as well as the consultant, is that the city pursue the discussion with ODOT about including that in the street reconstruction that they do. But with regard to redevelopment, what we've looked at and propose is a mix of strategies and focus more on the long-term success and not just a short-term win, not just having something that, oh, we got this done, doing things that fit into the long-term vision of how this area can be established and redeveloped and built over time. But doing that in a way that mixes different things together, because there will not be a single strategy or funding source that takes care of all of this. We'll have to mix things together and do a number of things as we go to make each of these a reality. We also looked at implementation ideas for land use with regard to how this can be adopted as an element of the comp plan, for example, but also updating the development regulations, our zoning and subdivision regs, to help require things like that more, those redevelopments like along 6th and Western, more at a block level, how we can help provide better design standards for some of these areas, and then how to build from here as we go forward. But also how we can start to use each of these urban design, this kit of parts in each of our street projects, how we started to look at making each of these corridors or these projects that are proposed out of this priorities in the CIP and how we start to balance those, and then again mixing the partnerships to make these things happen, but also the funding sources. So next steps, the consultant is currently finalizing the document to get it to a final draft stage. Staff has seen one draft and provided feedback. We're looking at doing, after this study session with you, just to get it in front of you and give you an idea of what's potentially coming, bringing this back to you later this month for adoption as an element to the comprehensive plan, or an amendment, if you will, and providing a recommendation to the city council to adopt it as well. Council has seen this presentation. They're looking at, right now, as far as the schedule, having this before them at their first meeting on January 10th to approve as an element to the comprehensive plan as well. That's a lot of information with quite a few sidebars, but I'd be happy to try and answer any questions.
I have a question.
Okay.
If it became part of the comprehensive plan, how would that manifest itself? Is it going to be something revisited regularly when decisions are made about?
When we get projects come in or development proposals, it would be something we would look at just like everything else in the comprehensive plan. If it has an impact on how this could be implemented or how the implementation of this may affect a development proposal, we would take that into account. It would help give us additional standing with regard to potential grant applications that we would make to help fund some of these projects. It would also help us to justify why it would potentially be prioritized higher in the CIP or the capital improvement program versus some other projects.
Would it ever lead to someone with the city actively working to see that these things were accomplished, or is it going to be more of a passive plan on the shelf that we consult once in a while?
Commissioner, I don't do plans that sit on shelves.
Good.
I just don't.
Thank you.
That's just not how I work. So staff would be working between community development, engineering, and then other departments to help implement each of these. And again, some of these would require more of a detailed engineering design. So that would be, in some cases, the next step. We'd be wanting to program that. Some of these would be more procedural type of things. Some of these would be policy changes. So, for example, we could do more of a focused as a review for development proposals in the study area because of this study, and try and take that into account. If somebody wanted to do something along one of the routes, one of the things we would try to make sure they knew was we're looking ultimately at a bike route in this area. So in terms of street right away, we're looking at this. So this is how much space you would have and where you would need to place utilities as you rebuild them. Things like that in the everyday discussions would be part of how we use this. We would also use this as a blueprint, like I said, for grant applications if we're trying to apply for funding for one of these corridors to help get it built. There's a number of ways it can be used on a daily basis. And when you look at this study in relation to some of the other redevelopment projects that have come online, at least in the public discussion over the last 3 months, this is another piece of a larger puzzle that can help provide significant impact to the community.
I do have one question, and that is, it looks like page 53, the land use updates, that's really what's going to be adopted as part of the comp plan, correct? Because it contains the future land use.
Correct. So it would be amending the future land use map.
Okay. Yeah, I just thought that I would clarify that. So
sure.
And make sure I had it right.
No. Better to ask. That's another reason why we wanted to do this session with you.
Well, the timing might be good given the new federal stress to spend on infrastructure. But that's going to take a while for that funding to come. But it seems like this would give some guidance towards projects.
That is a potential new funding source that could be used for some of this. Yes.
Water, sanitary sewer, broadband. So
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's no reason why those, I mean, if this were written, you could add a little bit to this and all
Right,
those would be in there.
absolutely. I just
Yeah.
thought I think that I feel a compulsion to say that every time any of my clients start talking about the money.
Yeah.
So,
It wouldn't take much imagination to put those kinds of things in here. Another one was equity, over the social justice type things would have no trouble putting the correct language in there for those kinds of things as well.
It doesn't specifically use language like that, but we do talk about the idea of trying to make sure we connect different facets of the community and different sections of the community with this plan. And I do, as a staff member, feel like it does that, especially when you look at those connections between various parts of the community geographically in this study area, and what the potential economic impact that implementation of this study can have. It can provide a lot of amenities to a number of people throughout the community.
I don't have a question, but just a comment. I really appreciate taking the time to go through this as a commission and take a look at this. And gosh, over the years, I've seen lots of different opportunities and plans and thoughts. And I think this is one of the better ones that we've seen, in that it really has a connectivity for the different parts of Stillwater that I think some of the others have been lacking. And I do very much appreciate the implementation piece of this that actually almost gives us a roadmap, if you will. However funding comes, whether that is privately funded or if opportunities of grants were to come the way of the city, that would be fabulous, but who knows the speculation on that. But it's nice to see kind of bite-sized pieces as to how maybe that could occur. So thank you very much for the time. I appreciate taking a look at it.
And the connectivity issue, especially between key areas, is something we knew going in would be an issue, and so we wanted to make sure it did that. And we wanted something that could be implementable, if nothing else in steps, but being able to disconnect steps and do them separately or together with other pieces, we felt was important as well.
I'd just like to make another comment too. I mean, it was alluded to, is there going to be anyone overseeing this implementation, whatever form that implementation takes? It would seem that it would be a good idea if there was a project coordinator, integrator, because there's so many different projects going on, from Block 34, the core corridor redevelopment, to the 6th Avenue corridor redevelopment. And of course, there's the constant churn, not only in the council, the planning commission, and city staff. If there would be an office in the city, and I use office not as an office, but that someone who would help coordinate those activities. Because we all know there's been lots of ideas over the past 25 years, and sorry, don't mean to laugh, but for various reasons they fall to the wayside. But if there was more direction, perhaps that might give these different projects a higher degree of possibility of succeeding.
In some communities, there would be a person like that. I know in the city manager, some of these projects that you mentioned have been led by staff in the city manager's office. This one is a joint community development engineering type of project. They funded it, but we helped run the project for them. And we've been involved with Husband Street as well as a secondary role in helping them run that project as well. I think it's going to depend on the project, on kind of who runs point, if you will. But I think you'll see a mix of staff from different departments going forward do some of those things. Like I said, I know the convention center and Block 34, those are being led in the CMO office. But again, it's going to vary by the project. But I think those people are there, and those staff positions are there. Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Harkins. Appreciate it. Okay, last item on the agenda is miscellaneous items from staff, planning commissioners, or the city attorney for discussion and possible action. I see none. The next planning commission meeting will be December 21st. And do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Without objection, I move to adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
A motion and a second to adjourn. We shall now vote.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Allred?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Prather?
Yes.
Mr. Holgren?
Yes.
We're adjourned.